Everything you own will be mine anyway, Dad. So why don't you stop acting like you're still in charge? Those 12 words changed my life. Not because they hurt, not because they shocked me, but because they finally forced me to see the truth I had spent years avoiding. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories about family, justice, and second chances, please like, share, and subscribe. My name is William Carter, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew exactly who my family was. I was wrong. The irony is that the moment my son revealed his true character happened during what was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of our year. It was my granddaughter Sophie's 12th birthday. The private dining room overlooked Boston Harbor. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected thousands of city lights dancing on the water below. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath expensive chandeliers. Waiters moved quietly between tables carrying dishes that cost more than my father earned in a week when I was growing up. Everywhere I looked, there was luxury. The kind of luxury I had spent 40 years building. Ethan sat at the head of the table. My son looked confident, successful, and admired. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly. His expensive watch caught the light every time he lifted his glass. Around him sat investors, friends, business associates, and family members. Everyone laughed at his jokes. Everyone listened when he spoke. They saw a successful executive who had inherited leadership of Carter Distribution, one of the largest logistics companies in New England. What they did not see was the man he had become behind closed doors. Not yet. Sophie sat beside me. She was the only person at the table who still seemed genuinely happy to see me. "Grandpa," she whispered, leaning closer. "Did you bring it?" I smiled. Unlike most 12-year-olds, Sophie loved old traditions. Every birthday since she was born, I had given her a savings bond. The value was never the point. The lesson was, my father had done the same for me. Small gifts, long-term thinking, patience, the understanding that real wealth grows. Quietly over time, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. Sophie's eyes lit up immediately. Before I could hand it to her, Melissa's voice interrupted. My daughter-in-law laughed softly. "Another one of those old-fashioned bonds? William, you really should update your gift ideas." A few guests chuckled politely. I ignored them. Sophie reached for the envelope. "Thank you, Grandpa." But Ethan suddenly held out his hand. "Let me see that." His tone sounded casual, but something about it made me uneasy. He opened the envelope and pulled out the bond certificate. Then he laughed. Loudly. Much louder than necessary. $50? The room grew quieter. Ethan held the certificate up for everyone to see. "Dad, are you serious? $50? My stomach tightened. "It is a savings bond, Ethan. It matures over time. It teaches patience. It teaches being cheap," Ethan interrupted. More laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. He noticed Sophie is staring at her plate. Her smile had disappeared. Ethan shook his head. "Look around this room, Dad. The floral arrangement cost more than this bond. The birthday cake cost more than this bond. The valet parking probably costs more than this bond." My voice remained calm. "The value isn't the amount. It never was." Ethan rolled his eyes. "That is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps people poor." The words hit harder than he realized. Because I had grown up poor. My father had grown up poor. Everything Ethan enjoyed existed because generations before him understood sacrifice. Yet he mocked the very lesson that created his success. Melissa leaned toward one of her friends and whispered something. They both laughed. I could not hear the words, but I knew they were about me. Over the past 5 years, those whispers had become common. The old man, the retired founder, the burden, the relative everyone tolerated. Not because they loved him, because they needed his signature on a few remaining documents. Because his presence looked good at company events. Because appearances mattered. I suddenly felt tired. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying the same disappointment. For years. Then Ethan made his mistake. The one he can never take back. He placed the bond on the table and leaned toward me. His voice was low enough that most guests could not hear. But I heard every word. "Everything you own will be mine anyway, Dad. So stop pretending you're still important." The room seemed to disappear. The conversations, the music, the laughter, all of it faded into silence. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I stopped seeing the little boy I raised. I stopped seeing the teenager whose mistakes I excused. I stopped seeing the young executive I promoted too quickly. Instead, I saw a man who believed my life's work already belonged to him. A man who saw me as an obstacle standing between him and an inheritance. A man who no longer viewed me as his father, only as a resource. Ethan smiled and took a sip of wine, completely unaware that he had just changed everything. Because at that exact moment, a decision formed quietly inside my mind. A decision I would act on less than 12 hours later. By sunrise, my son would wake up believing he still controlled his future. By sunset, he would discover he had lost something far more valuable than money. And for the first time in many years, I would finally disappear. People think life-changing decisions happen with dramatic speeches, slammed doors, or public confrontations. They do not. The most important decisions are usually made in silence. Mine was. I finished the rest of the birthday dinner without saying another word. Ethan returned to entertaining his guests. Melissa continued discussing vacation plans with her friends. The investors laughed at stories about stock prices and golf tournaments. And Sophie quietly slipped her hand into mine beneath the table. "Grandpa," she whispered, "are you okay?" I looked at her and smiled. "I am now, sweetheart." She did not understand what I meant. Neither did I fully. Not yet, but something inside me had shifted. The illusion was gone. For years, I had convinced myself Ethan's arrogance was temporary. I blamed stress, success, pressure, bad influences. I told myself he still cared somewhere underneath it all. Fathers are good at lying to themselves, especially when the truth involves their children. After the dinner ended, guests filtered toward the elevators overlooking the harbor. Expensive coats were collected. Luxury cars waited outside. I stood alone near the entrance while Ethan finished speaking with a group of investors. Finally, he walked over. "You leaving already?" he asked. I nodded. "It is getting late." He glanced at his watch. "Good. I have an early meeting tomorrow." There was no thank you for attending. No appreciation for helping organize the event. No concern about my drive home. Just dismissal. The same dismissal that had become routine. As I turned to leave, I heard Melissa speaking behind me. "At least he behaved tonight." Ethan laughed. "Give him credit. He is finally learning his place." I kept walking. 20 years earlier, those words would have broken my heart. Now, they simply confirmed what I already knew. The drive back to the estate took 40 minutes. Snow drifted lightly across the windshield as Boston's skyline disappeared behind me. Carter Manor sat on 12 acres outside the city. It had been my dream house once, built after the company reached its first $100 million in revenue. Back then, every room represented achievement. Every brick represented sacrifice. Tonight, it felt like a museum filled with memories nobody valued anymore. The house was quiet when I arrived. Most of the staff had gone home. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat alone in the library. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. Midnight came and went. I stared at the fire burning inside the stone fireplace. Then I did something I had not done in nearly 3 years. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside sat a black leather folder. Simple, unremarkable, yet powerful enough to destroy everything Ethan believed he owned. Most people assumed I retired when I stepped down as chief executive officer. That was partially true. Ethan became the public face of the company. He attended conferences, appeared in magazines, gave interviews. But retirement and surrender are not the same thing. While Ethan managed daily operations, ownership remained somewhere else. Entirely. With me. Hidden behind legal structures most people never bothered to understand. Including my son. I opened the folder. Trust documents. Partnership agreements. Voting rights. Transfer authorizations. Everything carefully organized by my attorney over the previous decade. There was a reason I never transferred full control. Deep down, perhaps I had always known this day would come. My phone buzzed. The screen displayed a familiar name. Richard Holloway. My attorney. It was nearly 1 in the morning. Richard never called this late unless something mattered. William? His voice sounded alert despite the hour. I assumed the dinner went badly. News travels fast. One of the investors called me. Apparently, Ethan made quite a spectacle. I looked toward the fire. Not a spectacle. A revelation. Silence filled the line. Richard understood immediately. After 30 years, he knew my voice better than most family members did. Are you ready? He asked quietly. I took a long breath. For years, that question would have frightened me. Tonight, it brought relief. Yes, I am ready. We spoke for almost an hour. Trust transfers, board notifications, executive authority, emergency succession provisions. Every safeguard we had built over the years suddenly moved from theory into reality. By the time we finished, a plan existed. Clean, legal, final, no angue, no revenge, just consequences. When the call ended, I walked upstairs and entered my bedroom. On the dresser sat an old photograph. Ethan at age 8, missing front teeth, holding a baseball glove twice the size of his hand, smiling as if the world belonged to him. I picked up the frame. For a moment, doubt returned. Not because Ethan deserved another chance, because fathers never stop hoping, even when hope becomes foolish. I stared at that photograph for several minutes. Then I placed it face down. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I was already awake. The sun had barely risen when Richard's email arrived. Everything is prepared, awaiting authorization. My finger hovered over the screen. One click. That was all. One click would trigger board notifications. Freeze discretionary accounts linked to family trusts. Revoke. Delegated executive authority. Activate ownership protections. Ethan would arrive at work believing he controlled an empire. By lunchtime, he would discover the empire had never been his. I thought about his word from the night before. Everything you own will be mine anyway. Then I remembered Sophie's embarrassed face. The laughter, the contempt, the years of disrespect disguised as success. My finger moved. Authorization approved. Sent. The email disappeared. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The room remained silent. The world remained unchanged. Then my phone began vibrating. One message after another. Confirmation notices. Legal acknowledgments. Board responses. The process had begun. I looked out the window as sunlight spread across the frozen grounds. Somewhere in Boston, Ethan was probably waking up, stretching comfortably inside his penthouse, preparing for another day as king of a kingdom he believed belonged to him. He had no idea that the kingdom's gates had already closed, and before the day ended, he would learn a lesson that no amount of money could protect him from. At exactly 8:17 that morning, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Ethan, right on schedule. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, what the hell is going on? There it was. Not good morning. Not how are you. Not concerned. Only panic. I took a sip of coffee before responding. Good morning to you too, Ethan. This is not funny. My executive access was revoked. The board meeting was moved without my approval. My company credit cards are frozen. Your company? I asked calmly. Silence followed. Then his voice sharpened. You know exactly what I mean. No, Ethan. I don't think I do. The line went quiet again. I could almost hear him trying to control his temper. Dad, if this is some kind of joke, it needs to stop right now. Investors are asking questions. The legal department is acting weird. Nobody will tell me anything. I stared out the kitchen window as snow continued falling across the property. For the first time in years, I felt completely calm. Maybe you should ask yourself why. What does that mean? It means actions have consequences. Ethan laughed bitterly. You cannot seriously be doing this because of one argument. One argument? I repeated. Is that what you think happened? More silence. Then he changed tactics. Dad, listen. You're upset. I get it. Maybe I was harsh last night. Maybe? I asked. Fine. I was harsh. Happy? Now can you call whoever you called and fix this? The arrogance remained. Even now, he still believed the problem was temporary. He still believed authority existed to serve him. He still believed I would clean up the mess. Just like always. Ethan, yes, I have spent 38 years protecting you from consequences. Today, I'm retiring from that job. Before he could respond, I ended the call. The phone rang again immediately. Then again. Then again. I ignored every call. By 10 o'clock, There were 14 missed calls and 8 text messages. Some angry, some demanding, some desperate. Around noon, another call arrived, this time from Richard Holloway. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Worse than expected," he replied. Apparently, Ethan assumed he owned more than he actually does. I laughed softly. So did half the board. The emergency meeting concluded an hour ago, and Richard's voice became serious. They voted unanimously. Ethan has been suspended pending a complete review of company leadership. I closed my eyes, not because I was celebrating, because despite everything, hearing those words still hurt. He was my son, the little boy who used to ride on my shoulders during 4th of July parades. The teenager whose baseball games I never missed. The young man I believed would someday lead with integrity. Somewhere along the way, that boy disappeared. In his place stood a man consumed by entitlement. Richard interrupted my thoughts. "There is something else." "What?" "Melissa called 3 board members this morning. Apparently, she was demanding explanations." "That sounds like Melissa." One of them recorded the conversation. I frowned. "Why?" "Because she threatened lawsuits, media exposure, and investor retaliation." I shook my head slowly. "They still do not understand." "No," Richard agreed. "They think this is a negotiation." It is not. After ending the call, I walked through the house one final time. Every room held memories. Grace decorating Christmas trees. Ethan opening birthday presents. Family dinners around the long oak table. For years I had stayed because of those memories. But memories are not the same as reality. Reality was sitting in my pocket. A plane ticket. 3 weeks earlier, I had booked it after another disappointing family gathering. Something inside me had already begun preparing for departure long before the birthday dinner. Deep down, perhaps I had known this moment was coming. By late afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. "Ethan," I watched from the second-floor window as he stormed toward the front entrance. Seconds later, the front door slammed open. "Dad!" His voice echoed throughout the house. "Dad!" I remained upstairs. Let him search. Let him feel uncertainty for once. He moved from room to room, calling my name. Eventually, he found me standing inside the library. Thank God. He looked exhausted. His expensive suit jacket hung open. His tie was crooked. For the first time in years, he looked less like a powerful executive and more like a frightened child. "What is happening?" he demanded. I gestured toward a chair. "Sit down." "No." "Sit down, Ethan." Something in my voice finally reached him. Reluctantly, he obeyed. Then I opened the black leather folder and placed it on the desk between us. "What is this?" "The truth." He flipped through the pages. His expression changed with every document. Confusion. Disbelief. Panic. No, this isn't possible." "Apparently it is." "You never transferred ownership?" "Correct." "You still control the trust?" "Correct." "The voting shares?" "Correct." Ethan stared at me as though seeing a stranger. "Why would you do this?" "Because I built it. Because ownership and management are not the same thing. Because trust must be earned." His face turned red. "I have worked for that company for 15 years, and I gave you every opportunity to succeed." His hand shook. "You cannot take my future away." I looked at him quietly. Then I repeated his own words. "Everything you own will be mine anyway." The color drained from his face. For the first time, he remembered exactly what he had said. For the first time, he understood that I remembered too. The room fell. Silent. Outside, snow continued drifting across the grounds. Finally, Ethan spoke. "What happens now?" I looked at the folder, then at my son, then at the suitcase already packed beside the door. "Now," I said softly, "now I leave." And for the first time since he was a child, genuine fear appeared in Ethan's eyes. "What do you mean you're leaving?" Ethan asked. His voice sounded smaller now, less confident, less certain. For the first time all day, he was not speaking like an executive. He was speaking like a son who suddenly realized the ground beneath him was disappearing. I looked at the suitcase standing beside the library door. It was not large. One suitcase. 40 years of work, 68 years of life, reduced to what I could carry with me. Strange how little a person actually needs when they stop living for appearances. "Exactly what I said," I replied calmly. I'm leaving. Ethan stood up so quickly the chair nearly tipped over. You can't just disappear. I smiled sadly. Why not? Because this is your home. Is it? I asked. The question stopped him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I looked around the library. The shelves. The photographs. The awards. The memories. A house only feels like home when the people inside want you there. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Deep down, he knew I was right. For years, every conversation had revolved around what I could provide. Every visit came with a request. Every family gathering felt increasingly transactional. I had been living in my own house like a guest whose invitation could be revoked at any moment. Dad, Ethan started. I didn't mean what I said. I looked at him carefully. Which part? His eyes dropped toward the floor. He had no answer, because both of us knew the truth. People do not accidentally reveal beliefs they do not hold. They reveal beliefs they have been hiding. My phone buzzed. Another message from Richard Holloway. Everything finalized. Transfer complete. The timing felt almost symbolic. One chapter ending. Another beginning. Ethan noticed the message. What did you do? He asked quietly. I protected what I spent my life building. From me, the hurt in. His voice surprised me. Not because he felt hurt. Because he genuinely believed he was the victim. No, yen surat. For you. He laughed bitterly. That doesn't even make sense. It will someday. A car door slammed outside. Moments later, hurried footsteps crossed the foyer. Melissa entered the library without knocking. Her face was flushed with anger. William, have you lost your mind? There it was. Not concern, not confusion, not respect, just outrage. Good afternoon, Melissa. Don't patronize me. She waved a stack of papers in the air. Do you know what people are saying? Investors are panicking. The board is asking questions. Reporters are calling. Then it sounds like everyone is having a busy day. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Melissa. No. She pointed directly at me. This is emotional blackmail. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the irony was breathtaking. For years they had used guilt, obligation, and expectation as tools of control. The moment those tools stopped working, they accused me of manipulation. Melissa continued, You can't punish us because your feelings got hurt. The sentence settled over the room like a cloud. Finally, I understood something Grace had tried to tell me before she died. My wife used to say that character is revealed when people lose access to something they believe they deserve. Looking at Melissa now, I finally understood what she meant. This was never about my feelings, I said quietly. Then what is it about? Ethan asked. I looked directly at him. Respect. Silence. Complete silence. For years, I confused love with tolerance. I tolerated things I should not have tolerated. I ignored things I should have confronted. I kept giving because I thought generosity would eventually be appreciated. I paused. I was wrong. Melissa folded her arms. So this is revenge. No, I shook my head. Revenge would require me to stay and watch. That answer seemed to unsettle them more than anything else. Because suddenly they realized something. I was not threatening to leave. I had already left emotionally. The decision had already been made. They were arguing with yesterday's version of me, the version that still hoped they would change. That man no longer existed. Around 5 o'clock, Benjamin Reed arrived. Ethan had met him only once years earlier. Benjamin and I had served together on a nonprofit board before his retirement. After losing his wife, he moved to a small coastal town in Maine and spent his days restoring old boats and volunteering at the local library. 6 months earlier, he had invited me to visit. At the time, I declined. Now I smiled when I saw him carrying a travel bag through the front door. Ready? He asked. I nodded. Ethan looked from Benjamin to me, then to the suitcase, then back again. Slowly, realization spread across his face. You planned this. I thought about the plane ticket, the legal preparations, the conversations with Richard, the months of growing disappointment. Not exactly, I said. I prepared for it. Melissa's expression hardened. Where are you going? Benjamin answered before I could. Somewhere peaceful. You can't take him away. Benjamin smiled politely. He's not a hostage. Ethan took a step forward. Dad, please. The word caught me off guard. Please. I had not heard genuine desperation in his voice for years. For a brief moment, I almost changed my mind. Then I remembered the birthday dinner. The laughter. The contempt. The certainty that everything I owned already belonged to him. And I realized something important. If I stayed now, nothing would change. The lesson would never be learned. Sometimes distance teaches what proximity cannot. I picked up my suitcase. The room fell silent. Melissa looked angry. Ethan looked frightened. For the first time in a very long time, I felt free. As Benjamin and I walked toward the front door, Ethan followed us. Dad, I stopped. What? His voice cracked slightly. How long will you be gone? I looked at him, then at the house, then at the fading sunlight beyond the windows. Long enough for you to discover who you are without my shadow protecting you. With that, I stepped outside. The cold evening air filled my lungs. Behind me stood the life I had spent decades building. Ahead of me waited something entirely unknown. The SUV. Door closed. The engine started. And as Carter Manor disappeared in the rearview mirror, my son finally realized that I had not just changed a will. I had changed the future. The first night after leaving Carter Manor, I slept better than I had in years. That surprised me. I expected guilt, anxiety, doubt. Instead, I slept for nearly 10 hours without waking once. When I opened my eyes the next morning, sunlight streamed through a window overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Waves rolled gently against a rocky shoreline below. Seagulls drifted across the sky. For several moments, I simply lay there listening to the sound of water. No phone calls, no board meetings, no family demands. Just silence. Peaceful silence. Benjamin's house sat on a hillside outside a small coastal town in Maine. Nothing about it was impressive. That was exactly why I loved it. No marble floors, no gatti d'entrance, no staff, just weathered wood, salt air, and a view worth more than any mansion I had ever owned. Benjamin was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. Coffee? He asked. Please. He handed me a mug and nodded toward the ocean. Not a bad office view. I laughed. Definitely an upgrade. We spent the morning walking along the harbor. Fishing boats drifted in and out of the marina. Shop owners swept sidewalks. Locals greeted each other by name. Nobody cared who I was. Nobody knew about Carter distribution. Nobody knew my net worth. Nobody expected anything from me. It felt strangely liberating. Around noon, my phone buzzed for the first time all day. Ethan. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, another call. Melissa. Ignored. Then 3 more. Then 4. By evening, I had accumulated 22 missed calls and dozens of messages. Benjamin glanced at my phone while we sat outside, watching the sunset. They seemed persistent. They seemed panicked. He nodded. Good. I looked at him. Good? Benjamin smiled. William, people only discover the value of something when they lose access to it. The next morning, Richard Holloway called. You should probably know what's happening back home. I settled into a chair, overlooking the water. Let me guess. Chaos? Significant chaos. I could hear papers shuffling in. The background. Ethan spent most of yesterday trying to convince board members this situation is temporary. How'd that go? Richard laughed softly. Poorly. Apparently several directors have been waiting years for an excuse to challenge him. That surprised me. Then again, maybe it shouldn't have. Success often hides flaws until pressure reveals them. Anything else? Plenty. 3 major investors requested meetings. Internal audits have started. Human Resources received multiple complaints from employees regarding executive behavior. My stomach tightened. Complaints? Against Ethan? Richard paused. More than anyone realized. The information hit me harder than expected, because it meant the problem extended beyond family. The arrogance, the entitlement, the disrespect. It had spread into every area of his life. Grace used to say that character leaves fingerprints everywhere. Once again, my late wife appeared to have been right. Later that afternoon, I received a message from Sophie. Unlike her parents, her text contained only one sentence. Grandpa, I miss you. That one sentence affected me more than 22 missed calls from Ethan. I immediately called her. Grandpa, Her voice brightened instantly. Hey, sweetheart. Where are you? Somewhere near the ocean. Cool. Her excitement sounded genuine. Are you having fun? I looked toward the harbor. More than I expected. There was a pause. Then her voice became quieter. Dad is really upset. I know. Mom too. I know. Another pause followed. Then came a question I had been expecting. Are you coming back? Children have a way of asking the questions adults avoid. I took a deep breath. Someday. Just not yet. She seemed to think about that. Okay. Then she surprised me. Grandpa? Yes. I think Dad was wrong. My chest tightened. About what? Everything. I closed my eyes briefly. Sophie continued. You should not have said those things. Mom either. I wanted to tell them that, but they wouldn't listen. For a moment, I could not speak. Out of everyone in the family, the 12-year-old understood the situation most clearly. Thank you, sweetheart. I love you. Love you too, Grandpa. After we ended the call, I sat alone for a long time, watching the waves, thinking, remembering. By the end of the week, my new routine began forming naturally. Morning walks along the harbor, coffee with Benjamin, volunteer work restoring boats at the local maritime museum, evenings spent reading beside a fireplace instead of sitting through family arguments. Day by day, something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling angry. The resentment faded. The disappointment remained, but the anger disappeared. In its place came clarity. For years, I had confused sacrifice with love. I believed being a good father meant giving endlessly. Financial support, opportunities, forgiveness, seconde chance, third chances, don't chance. Yet somewhere along the way, generosity stopped being appreciated and became expected. That realization changed everything. One evening, about 3 weeks after my arrival, Benjamin handed me a local newspaper. You should see this. The business section featured a photograph of Ethan leaving company headquarters. The headline immediately caught my attention. Carter Distribution Board announces leadership review. Beneath the article sat another photograph. Ethan looked exhausted, older somehow. The confident executive from Sophie's birthday dinner had vanished. In his place stood a man facing consequences for the first time in his life. I folded the paper slowly. Benjamin studied my expression. How do you feel? I considered the question carefully. Sad. He nodded. Because he's your son. Exactly. The article ended with a single sentence that lingered in my thoughts long after I finished reading. Sources close to the family report that William Carter's current whereabouts remain unknown. Unknown. I smiled faintly. For the first time in decades, that was true. William Carter the founder. William Carter the provider. William Carter the safety net. He had disappeared. And somewhere back in Boston, my son was beginning to discover what life looked like without him. 6 weeks after I left Boston, Ethan finally stopped calling every day. That did not mean he stopped looking for me. It only meant desperation had evolved into determination. According to Richard Holloway, my son had hired private investigators, contacted former colleagues, and even reached out to distant relatives he had not spoken to in years. Ironically, he was putting more effort into finding me than he had put into maintaining our relationship before I left. Life has a strange sense of humor. One rainy afternoon, Benjamin and I were repairing a wooden sailboat at the Maritime Museum when my phone buzzed. Richard again. He seemed to have become my unofficial reporter covering the ongoing collapse of Ethan's certainty. You sitting down? He asked. Should I be? A brief laugh came through the speaker. The board officially removed Ethan as acting chief executive officer this morning. I rested the sanding block on the workbench. Permanent. Not yet. Interim status pending review. But if you want my professional opinion, the odds are not good. I looked out through the workshop windows toward the harbor. Fishing boats rocked gently against the docks. The contrast between my peaceful surroundings and the chaos unfolding in Boston felt almost surreal. How did he take it? I asked. Richard sighed. At first, anger, then blame. Now, I'm not sure. What does that mean? It means he asked about you. That caught my attention. Asked what? Whether you're healthy, whether you're happy, whether anyone is taking care of you. I remained silent. Richard noticed. That's new, William. Yes. It was. Previously, Every conversation Ethan initiated focused on access. Access to money, access to authority, access to control. Asking whether I was happy suggested something different, something human. After ending the call, I found myself thinking about Ethan more than usual. Not the executive, not the entitled adult, the child, the boy who used to sit beside me in the garage while I repaired bicycles. The teenager who once spent an entire summer helping me build a treehouse. Somewhere between those memories and the present, something had gone wrong, but perhaps not beyond repair. A week later, another unexpected development arrived. Sophie showed up, not alone. With Benjamin's help, Richard had quietly arranged transportation after receiving permission for both parents. Apparently, Sophie had insisted. I still remember seeing her running down the marina dock toward me. "Grandpa!" She nearly knocked me over with the force of her hug. I laughed harder than I had in months. "Easy there, kiddo. You look different. Good different or bad different?" She studied me carefully. Happy different. The observation struck me, because she was right. For years, happiness had become something I postponed, something I planned to enjoy later, after retirement, after another problem was solved, after another sacrifice. Here in this small coastal town, later had finally arrived. Sophie spent 4 days with us. We walked the beaches, visited bookstores, helped Benjamin restore an old fishing boat. One evening, while watching the sunset from the porch, she asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you still love Dad?" I smiled sadly. Children always find the center of every story. "Of course I do." "Then why did you leave?" I thought carefully before answering. Because sometimes loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from consequences. Sophie considered that. Like when my teacher doesn't give me extra credit after I forget my homework. Exactly like that. She nodded slowly. "Dad says you abandoned him." The words hurt more than I expected. Not because Ethan believed them, because part of me feared he truly did. "Do you think I abandoned him?" I asked. Sophie stared toward the ocean. "No. Why not?" Her answer came immediately. "Because you told him you loved him before you left. People who abandon you don't usually do that." I laughed softly, out of the mouths of children. The day Sophie returned home, she handed me a folded note. "Dad asked me to give you this if I thought the timing was right." My heartbeat quickened. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. Ethan's. I waited until that evening to open it. The letter was only 2 pages long. No legal arguments. No demands. No requests for money. No accusations. Just honesty. The first genuine honesty I had seen from my son in years. "Dad, I don't know if you're ready to read this. Honestly, I don't know if I'm ready to write it. But for the first time in my life, nobody is fixing my mistakes for me. And I think I'm finally beginning to understand how many mistakes I've made." I read the sentence 3 times. Then I continued. "I spent years believing the company was mine because I helped run it. I believed your sacrifices were obligations. I believed your support would always exist no matter how I treated you. Looking back, I am ashamed of all of it." My eyes lingered on that word. Ashamed. Not angry. Not defensive. Ashamed. The letter ended with a sentence that stayed with me long after I folded it closed. "I don't expect forgiveness right now. I just hope someday I earn the chance to deserve it." I sat on the porch until well after dark, reading those words again and again. Finally, Benjamin stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Good news?" he asked. I handed him the letter. He read it carefully, then smiled. Looks like the lesson finally started working. I stared out at the moonlit ocean. "Maybe." Benjamin shook his head. "No, William. Definitely maybe. That's a lot further than where he was 6 weeks ago." And for the first time since leaving Boston, I allowed myself to wonder whether this story might someday have a different ending than the one I originally expected. 3 months passed before I returned to Boston. Not permanently, just for a single day. A board meeting required my presence, and some matters could not be handled remotely. The moment my plane landed, I felt the difference. The city moved faster, louder. Everyone seemed to be rushing somewhere. Strangely, it no longer felt like home. Richard met me at the airport. He looked at me for several seconds before laughing. "You actually look younger." I smiled. Apparently, stress is expensive. During the drive downtown, he updated me on everything. Ethan remained employed by the company, but no longer in a leadership role. The board had reassigned him to a regional operations position. His salary remained comfortable, but the prestige was gone. The executive office was gone. The authority was gone. For the first time since joining Carter Distribution, he answered to someone else. How is he handling it? I asked. Richard considered the question. Better than I expected. Meaning, no lawsuits, no public complaints, no attempts to pressure the board. That surprised me. Really? Richard nodded. Honestly, I think reality finally got through to him. We arrived at company headquarters shortly before noon. The building looked exactly the same as when I left. Glass, steel, success. Yet somehow it felt smaller now, less important. As I entered the lobby, employees greeted me warmly. Not because of my title, because they genuinely seemed happy to see me. Receptionists, security guards, administrative staff, people I had known for years. Their reactions reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. Halfway through the afternoon, I saw Ethan for the first time since leaving. He was standing near a conference room reviewing paperwork. For a moment, neither of us moved. The last time we stood face to face, I had walked away from everything. He looked different now. The expensive confidence was gone. The arrogance seemed stripped away. He looked tired, but also more grounded, more real. Dad, Ethan. Silence followed. Not hostile, just uncomfortable. Two people standing between who they used to be and who they might become. Finally, he spoke. Thank you for reading my letter. I nodded. Thank you for writing it. His shoulders relaxed slightly. We moved to a small conference room overlooking the city. Neither of us seemed eager to rush the conversation. How's Maine? He asked. Peaceful. He smiled faintly. Sophie won't stop talking about it. She's a good kid. His eyes softened immediately. She is. For several minutes, we talked about simple things. Weather, books, the harbor, Sophie's school projects. Ordinary conversation. It felt strange, yet strangely good. Eventually, Ethan looked down at his hands. I owe you an apology. I remained silent. Let him continue. Not just for the birthday dinner. He shook his head. For years. The honesty in his voice felt different now. There was no performance, no audience, no strategy. I kept telling myself I earned everything. He laughed bitterly. Then I lost access to it and realized how much of my success rested on things I didn't build. My chest tightened, because that realization had taken me decades to learn myself. Dad, I honestly thought you would never leave. There it was, the core of everything. Entitlement often begins with certainty. Certainty that people will always stay, always forgive, always tolerate. I know, I said quietly. Ethan nodded. That's the worst part. I know. We sat in silence for a while. The city stretched beyond the windows. Cars moved through the streets below. Life continued. Finally, Ethan asked the question that mattered most. Can things ever go back to the way they were? I thought about it carefully. Then I shook my head. No. Pain flickered across his face. Before he could respond, I continued. Because they weren't working. He looked down. You're right. But that doesn't mean they can't become something better. His eyes lifted slowly. Hope. Small but visible. You really believe that? I smiled. I'm sitting here talking to you, aren't I? For the first time all afternoon, he laughed. A genuine laugh. Not the polished laugh of an executive entertaining clients. The laugh of son. Later that evening, before leaving for the airport, I stopped by Sophie's school play. She had a small role. 3 lines. Yet she performed as though she were starring on Broadway. Afterward, she ran into my arms. You came. Of course I did. She looked between me and Ethan standing nearby. Then she smiled mischievously. You guys are talking again. Neither of us answered. We did not need to. Sophie already knew. Children usually do. As I boarded my flight back to Maine that night, I realized something important. Reconciliation is not a moment. It is a process. Trust is not restored through one apology or one conversation. It is rebuilt through consistency, through effort, through time. The damage had taken years to create. Healing would take time too. But for the first time since that birthday dinner, I could see the possibility. Not certainty, possibility. And sometimes possibility is enough to begin. 6 months after I left Carter Manor, I received an invitation that nearly made me laugh. It arrived by regular mail instead of email. A handwritten envelope. No corporate logo. No assistant. No legal language. Just my name written carefully across the front. Inside was a single card. Grandpa, please come on my 13th birthday. Love, Sophie. Beneath her signature, someone had added a second note. I hope you'll consider it. Ethan. I stared at the card for several minutes. Not because I was unsure about attending, because I realized how much had changed. A year earlier, Ethan would have ordered my presence. 6 months earlier, he would have demanded it. Now he was asking, respectfully. The difference mattered. When the day arrived, I flew to Boston and drove directly to the venue. Sophie had chosen something simple. No luxury hotel, no celebrity chef, no five-star restaurant. Just a lakeside community center overlooking a small park where children could run freely. The moment I arrived, I understood whose idea that had been. Sophie's. The party felt warm, genuine, real. Families talked. Children laughed. Nobody seemed interested in impressing anyone. It reminded me of birthdays from decades earlier before success complicated everything. Sophie spotted me first. Grandpa. She sprinted across the lawn and threw her arms around me. You came. Wouldn't miss it. She grinned. Good answer. Ethan approached a few moments later. He looked different again. Healthier than when I last saw him. More confident than during our difficult conversations. But this confidence felt earned rather than borrowed. Thanks for coming, Dad. Thanks for inviting me. We shook hands. Then, after a brief hesitation, he pulled me into a hug. It lasted only a few seconds. Yet somehow it felt larger than any speech either of us could have given. Throughout the afternoon, I observed quietly. Ethan spent most of the party helping serve food, organizing games, and making sure guests enjoyed themselves. Not once did he try to be the center of attention. Melissa surprised me too. The sharp edges, I remembered, seemed softened. She greeted me warmly and spent much of her time helping parents with younger children. People can change. Slowly. Imperfectly. But they can change. Later that afternoon, Sophie dragged me toward a picnic table near the lake. I have something to show you. She handed me a school assignment. The title read, The Person Who Changed My Life. I smiled. And who was that? Read it. So I did. The essay described family, mistakes, forgiveness, learning from failure, growing stronger after difficult experiences. Halfway through, I realized something. The essay was not really about me. It was about her father. Specifically, it was about watching him change. One sentence stopped me completely. My dad used to think success meant getting everything you wanted. Now, he says success means becoming someone worth respecting. I read that sentence twice, then a third time. By the time I finished, my eyes felt suspiciously damp. Pretty good, Sophie asked. Very good. She smiled proudly. I got an A. You deserved it. As the sun began setting, Ethan and I found ourselves standing near the lake watching guests leave. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he broke the silence. The company offered me a promotion last month. Congratulations. He nodded. I turned it down. That surprised me. Why? Because it would have required relocating Sophie. He looked across the field where she was laughing with friends. A year ago, I would have accepted without thinking. I understood immediately. The statement was not about career advancement. It was about priorities. How did that feel? I asked. Ethan smiled. Strangely good. We stood quietly for another moment. Then he turned toward me. Do you remember what you said before you left? I nodded slowly. Probably. You said I needed to discover who I was without your shadow protecting me. His voice softened. I hated hearing that. I laughed. I know. The problem is... He shook his head. You were right. There was no bitterness in the admission. Only honesty. I spent most of my life measuring myself against things I didn't earn. His gaze drifted toward the lake. When all of that disappeared, I had no idea who I actually was. And now, he thought for a long moment. I'm still figuring it out. I smiled. That's a better answer than you would have given a year ago. He laughed. Definitely. As evening settled over the water, Sophie joined us. Without saying a word, she slipped one hand into mine and the other into Ethan's. Then she started walking toward the parking lot, pulling both of us behind her. Neither of us resisted. Looking down at our joined hands, I realized something profound. The lesson had never been about money. Not really. It was never about ownership, or control, or inheritance. It was about identity, about understanding that relationships cannot survive when people value possessions more than people. And for the first time since that painful birthday dinner, I believed Ethan finally understood that truth. Yet one final conversation still remained. One final truth needed to be spoken aloud before our story could truly come full circle. A month after Sophie's birthday, I received a phone call that would bring everything full circle. It came on a quiet Tuesday morning while I was helping Benjamin repaint an old fishing boat near the harbor. The number on my screen belonged to Richard Holloway. "You might want to come back to Boston," he said. "Why?" I asked. His voice carried a smile. "Because your son is about to do something I never thought I'd see." 2 days later, I found myself sitting quietly in the back row of a conference room at Carter Distribution headquarters. The board meeting had already begun. Most people in attendance had no idea I was there. That was intentional. Richard wanted me to see everything with my own eyes. At the front of the room stood Ethan, the same room where he had once spoken with absolute confidence. The same room where executives used to applaud his every decision. Yet something was different now. He no longer looked like a man trying to impress people. He looked like a man trying to earn their trust. After presenting quarterly reports and future plans, Ethan paused. Then he surprised everyone. "Before we conclude," he said, "there's something important I need to address." The room grew quiet. A year ago, I believed leadership was about authority. He glanced around the table. I believed success meant being the smartest person in the room. I believed titles earned respect. Several board members exchanged curious looks. Ethan continued. "I was wrong." Complete silence followed. "The truth is, I inherited opportunities one did not fully appreciate. I took people for granted. I confused entitlement with achievement." His voice remained steady. "Most importantly, I failed to show gratitude to the person who sacrificed the most to create those opportunities." My chest tightened. Richard glanced toward me, but said nothing. Ethan looked directly toward the back of the room. Not at me. At the empty chair reserved for founders during major meetings. "Today, I want the official record to reflect something." He took a slow breath. "Everything this company became started with William Carter. Not me." The room remained silent for several seconds. Then one board member began clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within moments, the entire room stood applauding. Not Ethan. The truth. I sat quietly in my seat, feeling emotions I struggled to describe. Pride. Relief. Gratitude. Not because my name was mentioned. Because my son finally understood what truly mattered. After the meeting ended, Ethan found me waiting in the hallway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. "You heard every word." He laughed nervously. "I was hoping you would." We walked together through the building. Past offices. Conference rooms. Hallways filled with memories. Eventually, we reached the lobby where Carter Distribution had first begun 40 years earlier in a rented office no larger than a garage. A framed photograph hung on the wall. Young William Carter standing beside a delivery truck. 26 years old. Broke. Ambitious. Hopeful. Ethan stopped in front of the picture. "I used to hate that photo." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because every time I looked at it, I felt like I was being compared to you." I nodded slowly. "And now?" He smiled. "Now I see it differently." "How?" "I finally understand that you weren't trying to build a company." He looked directly at me. "You were trying to build a future for your family." My throat tightened, because after everything that had happened, he finally understood. Not just the business, the sacrifice behind it. Later that evening, our entire family gathered for dinner. Not at a luxury restaurant. Not in a private room overlooking the harbor. Just a simple meal at Sophie's favorite neighborhood diner. The kind of place where waitresses remembered names and nobody cared what watch you wore. Sophie sat between us, exactly where she wanted to be. At one point, she looked around the table and grinned. "You know what's weird?" Melissa laughed. "What?" "This is the happiest dinner we've had in years." Nobody argued with her. Because she was right. There was no tension, no competition, no expectations. Just family. Real family. The kind that exists when people stop keeping score. As dessert arrived, Sophie raised her glass of lemonade. Can I make a toast? We all laughed. Of course, Ethan said. She stood dramatically. To Grandpa. The restaurant grew quiet around us. For leaving, Ethan nearly choked on his drink. Melissa covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Sophie continued. Because if Grandpa hadn't left, Dad would still be acting weird. The entire table burst into laughter. Even Ethan, especially Ethan. When the laughter finally faded, he looked at me. She's not entirely wrong. No, I admitted. She's not. A few days later, I returned to Maine. Not because I was running away anymore. Because it had become home. The harbor. The boats. The quiet mornings. The life I discovered after finally choosing myself. Yet things were different now. I no longer felt separated from my family. Distance and abandonment are not the same thing. I understood that now. So did Ethan. Every Sunday evening, we spoke on the phone. Sophie visited during school breaks. Melissa occasionally sent photographs. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things healthy families do. One evening, nearly a year after that birthday dinner, I sat alone on the porch watching the sunset over the Atlantic. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Thank you for leaving when you did. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed a reply. Thank you for learning from it. A few seconds later, another message appeared. Love you, Dad. Simple words. Words that once seemed impossible. I smiled and looked out toward the ocean. The waves rolled steadily against the shore. The sky glowed gold and orange. Somewhere beyond the horizon, tomorrow waited. And for the first time in many years, I looked forward to it. Looking back now, people often ask whether changing my will and disappearing was worth it. My answer is always the same. Leaving was never the goal. The goal was truth. The truth that respect cannot be inherited. Gratitude cannot be purchased. Character cannot be transferred like money. Every parent eventually faces a difficult choice. Continue protecting someone from consequences, or allow those consequences to teach what protection never could. I chose the second path. It was painful, lonely, uncertain, but it worked. Not because my son lost access to wealth, because he finally discovered values more important than wealth. And in the end, that became the greatest inheritance I could ever leave him. The end.